Right now we're going to learn a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages each side has in the American Revolution. We've talked about how all sorts of different events have led to the beginning of the Revolutionary War. The war has started at Lexington and Concord in April 1775. There are always people in a war who do the fighting, and there are people who do the thinking about how we're going to do the fighting. Well, one of the things that the thinkers need to do is assess what kind of position they're in to fight a war. Is there a chance you could actually win this? Well, we're going to find out that the Americans have some pretty big disadvantages. The British have some very large advantages. So use your chart you have for advantages and disadvantages. We're going to put some information on that chart to help us understand what big advantages the British have and what disadvantages the Americans will have to overcome. First of all, today's essential question is, how well was each side prepared for the American Revolution? By the end of this video, you should be able to answer that question, discussing which side has certain strengths and which side has certain weaknesses. Let's start with population. During a war, it is important, of course, to have a lot of people on your side. Now, the British statistics will be on the left here where the British flag is. American statistics where the Betsy Ross flag is on the right side. England and Great Britain has approximately 12 million people at the time of the American Revolution. On the American side, the colonies have about 2.8 million people, including many loyalists. Loyalists are people who are Americans but are loyal to the British Crown. They're not people who are really going to support the revolution. If you are reading My Brother Sam is Dead, you know that Life Meeker, the dad, is a loyalist. He is not happy that his son Sam has joined the American side and is fighting as a patriot. Manufacturing. During a war, you have to be able to make the equipment, the guns, the cannons, the clothing, the shoes, everything you need to fight a war. England's manufacturing is highly developed and growing. They are one of the leading industrial nations of the world. The way colonies worked is that you would take raw materials, send them to the mother country, England in our case. The mother country would turn them into finished products and then sell them. And so most of the manufacturing is in England. On the American side, we have almost no manufacturing. That's the way colonies worked. Most products would be actually made in the mother country. Little things might be made in America, little things meant for local use, but really not big things like, well, there weren't gun manufacturing places, there weren't places to make cannons. A lot of things cannot be made here in America for a lot of reasons. Money. Wars are very expensive. England is the wealthiest nation in the world. And of course, the American colonies are part of that. Yes, we've done pretty well here in the colonies. We have provided a lot of wealth for England, the mother country. In America, we don't have really any organized way to raise money to support the war effort. There are wealthy individuals. There are some people who have made quite a fortune. John Hancock might be one of the wealthiest people in the colonies. He's a shipping trader in Boston. Robert Morris in Philadelphia, another businessman, is one of the wealthiest people in the colonies. But we don't really have an organized system of creating or collecting money to fight a war. The Army. Of course, it takes an army to do well in a war. The British Army is large and well trained. They've also hired people called Hessians. Hesse, H-E-S-S-E, is a place in Germany where the local leaders will rent out people in their local area to wealthy nations to use as soldiers. The Hessians are tough fighters. They are cold-blooded killers in a lot of ways. The Americans are very afraid of these Hessian people because they fight for a living. That's what they do. Now, the downside about hiring Hessians or other professional soldiers is if they feel like they're not being treated right or they're not being paid well, they won't fight. They don't care about causes. They tend to care more about their paychecks. or their conditions that they're serving under. So you need to keep those people happy. On the American side, our Army is all volunteer. Now, of course, while they're in the Army, they are being paid more or less, but they're not trained professional soldiers. The Americans are, however, highly motivated. Many Americans are fighting for their independence from Great Britain. To some, they're fighting for adventure. Some may be fighting for land, fighting for families. But certainly, our independence is a big motivator for us. And so the Americans, while being volunteers and not being really very good soldiers, very skilled soldiers, they do have a lot of motivation. We are very poorly trained, however. It may sound exciting to get a gun and go fight the British, but boy, there's a lot more to military strategy and tactics than we might realize. And so the American Army is really not well equipped to fight a large, well-trained professional army. The Navy. The Navy's job is usually to transport people and materials for the Army, and move the Army from place to place, move all their equipment, and to do some, at least, fighting on sea. The British have the strongest Navy in the world. For over almost 100 years at this point, actually almost 200 years, the British Navy has been regarded as the best or one of the best in the world. And they are very, very good. The Americans have no Navy when the war began. It's not that we have a bad Navy. We don't have any Navy. We don't have military ships that can stop British soldiers from being transported or British goods from being transported. We do try to use ships called privateers. Privateers are privately owned military ships that we try to, privately owned trade ships that we try to put weapons on, and we try to make them into military ships to use against the British, but it really doesn't work very well. Leaders. Now here's a place where the Americans might have some advantage. The British, for a number of reasons, seem to keep their best leaders over in Europe. They keep some of their best military people in England, maybe because they're always fighting wars in Europe, and they believe that the American Revolution won't take the best and brightest. It won't require sending their best leaders. Maybe the lower level leaders can help. And so they wind up having few leaders actually capable of leading well here in America. The Americans, on the other hand, have excellent leaders. George Washington is, of course, known as the father of our country. He is going to command the American Army, the Continental Army, for most of the war. He doesn't do everything perfectly. He certainly doesn't win every battle, probably loses as much as he wins, but he does learn from his mistakes, and ultimately he is able to take what little resources he has and the poor army that he has and turn it into a fighting force that can really do well. The Americans also get help from a lot of foreign experts, people from France, people from part of what is now Germany, people from Spain, people from Eastern Europe. You know, the British have been the world leader for a long time. That means they have a lot of enemies. And some of those enemies are willing to come to America and fight for the American side. An example of how good and how famous and how badly needed some of those foreign leaders are is this picture right here. When we go to Washington, D.C., well, we'll hopefully see the White House. This is the White House right here. And if you leave the front door of the White House, where letter A is, and walk right across Pennsylvania Avenue, there is a park. That park is called Lafayette Park. It is named for one of those French leaders who came to help the Americans during the war. Now, the Marquis de Lafayette has a statue right here in this corner of the park. We'll see that when we go to Washington. The Marquis de Lafayette is well known for helping General George Washington win the war. Other foreign leaders who are in this park are Thaddeus Kosciuszko and Baron von Steuben and Count Jean-Baptiste Rochambeau. These are people from foreign countries who came to America to help us win our revolution. I guess you're pretty important if the park across the street is named for you and there's a statue of those four foreign leaders who helped us win the revolution on the four corners of the park, right across the street from the White House. There's a different look at that same same map, the White House would be down here. There's a statue to Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson, in the middle of the park, but the others, the ones who helped us win the Revolution, are on the four corners of the park. Geography. Here's another place where the Americans will have an advantage. The British are trying to fight very far from home. It's thousands of miles across the Atlantic from their base of operations and supplies. Now, the British were going to set up a place in Nova Scotia, Canada, to be their base in America, but even that is still a long way from where some of the fighting is actually happening. The British really aren't used to the size of the colonies. England is an island country. They don't have the tremendous size that America has. It's really difficult to control land when the land to be controlled is so large. And here in America, we have weather and climate conditions that they just don't have in England. England does not have tornadoes. They don't have hurricanes. They don't have blizzards. They don't have extreme hot and extreme cold temperature. Since England is an island, they really don't have a lot of the features that we have because the ocean water in the English Channel moderates their climate. They don't get real cold in the winter. They don't get real hot in the summer like America does. On the American side, we have the advantage of being close to home. We may not have a lot of supplies or a lot of people, but at least we are closer to our source of supplies. The Americans are more familiar with the land, the dense forests, the hills, the mountains, the swamps, lakes. We're a little more familiar with how to handle those circumstances. And we're more accustomed to the harsh conditions. Nobody really enjoys hurricanes, blizzards, tough winters, things like this. But at least the Americans are a little better equipped to handle them than the British because we're used to those conditions in a way that they are not. Finally, what's our analysis? Well, on that last box on your paper, the British have certain advantages. The Americans have certain advantages. Why don't you go ahead and give an analysis of how well each side is prepared for war? That's our LEQ. So in a sense, you're answering that LEQ in those last boxes about analysis at the bottom of your page.